Hello everyone, and welcome to our fifth video in our series on Shakespearean sonnets. Today we're going to be talking about essay writing, everyone's favorite topic. We're going to be doing that in light of what we've been studying in terms of Shakespearean sonnets. So if you haven't watched the rest of the video series, please make sure you do that before diving in today, particularly the one discussing Sonnet 138, because that is going to be one of the two options you have for writing your essay. So here is your essay prompt, this first option you'll have, and the option that I'm going to use as an example when we write our outline. And that is this: how does William Shakespeare characterize the nature of his relationship with the Dark Lady in Sonnet 138? In your response, you must discuss at least two types of literary devices that Shakespeare utilizes to explain the nature of his relationship. So here I just need to understand what I'm being asked, and that is to state what kind of relationship Shakespeare has with the Dark Lady and how I know that based on at least two different types of literary devices that he uses. Now that I've fully understood my prompt, the next thing I do is turn to my outlining. I'm going to start with my introduction. So the first thing that I look at in terms of an outline for an introduction is what I'm asked to include. So you'll see at the very top I've gone ahead and included a title. You can either put that in the very beginning, so it's the first thing that you think of if it comes to mind. If not, if you're struggling to find a title, it's not a big deal. Just simply wait till you've finished your essay, and by then you should have a better idea of what your essay discusses, because that should be reflected in that title you choose. So I've chosen the title Deception and Desire. So you know through my examination of Shakespeare's relationship with the Dark Lady, it's going to be one that I characterized as based on both deceit, so lying to one another, and also desire, so wanting something from the other. Turning then to my introduction, we already know from our essay writing in class that it must include these four things. So the first is the hook, and that is where, remember, I'm grabbing the attention of my reader. So it needs to be something that is thought-provoking, maybe provocative, but it needs to be interesting. The next thing I have to include then is an example of my hook in my outline of the introduction. And one thing that I might pick up on is this idea we generally have of love in the real world, and that is an idea of love that is patient, kind, and honest. I might include examples of where I've seen that in the world. For example, Disney movies. Love relationships always end happily. You always have this idea of seeing that person from across the room and you instantly connect and you fall in love. This is something repeated in popular TV shows, for example, or even Bible verses, right? Talking about love is patient, love is kind, it does not boast. And I'm going to use that to draw in my reader. And in this sense, I hook them by playing off of what I perceive to be their knowledge of love from a cultural perspective. The next thing I include then in my introduction is my title and author, and that simply here is Sonnet 138 by William Shakespeare. Maybe if I want to beef up my introduction, I'll include something along the lines of him being a renowned English poet from the Renaissance period and that he often wrote about love. Then the third thing I'm going to include in my introduction is a summary, very brief, remember, about what Sonnet 138 discusses. And based on our last video, I know that it discusses this relationship defined by mutual deceit, and that both Shakespeare and the Dark Lady stay in this relationship primarily because of the physical aspect of their love, the fact that it is pleasurable or desired by both of them to be together despite the lies that they tell to one another. And then the very last thing I put in my introduction, and this is the most important thing I put in my introduction, is my thesis statement. And because it's so important, I want to take a minute just to review what a thesis statement consists of and how I pull my thoughts in terms of structuring my thesis statement from the prompt itself. So the first thing I need to remember is, what is a thesis statement? And your thesis statement is that mathematical equation we discussed in class of your claim or your central argument plus your reason or your reason, so why I believe my argument is right, and this comprises my thesis statement. So now that I understand the structure, I need to then remind myself of those two steps I use in completing my thesis statement. And the first is understanding what the prompt is asking me. And I've already done that before, right? I understand that it's asking me to describe the nature of Shakespeare's relationship with the Dark Lady. And that then is going to be my claim. So what argument am I making about their relationship? The second step that I need to take is to understand how it's asking me to prove the nature of their relationship. And I know that it's asking me to prove that based on those two or more literary devices that I identify. Those are going to be my reasons. So I'm going to turn then to finally putting my thesis statement down on paper. And I structure it like this. Shakespeare utilizes verbal irony, imagery, and rhetorical questions to characterize his relationship with the Dark Lady as one based on mutual deceit. So you'll see in blue, I've highlighted then for you those aspects of the thesis statement we see above in the structure. So the first thing that I've included are my reasons. So those literary devices of verbal irony, imagery, and rhetorical questions. And then I go ahead and the last thing I include in my thesis statement is that central claim I'm making, that the relationship is based on mutual deceit. And you'll notice that I don't follow the same order that I gave above, and that's fine. You can either begin with your claim and then go on to your reasons, or you can state it as I've done here for you. For example, if you prefer to start with your claim, you could simply restructure this thesis statement as such. Shakespeare shows his relationship with the Dark Lady to be characterized by mutual deceit based on his use of verbal irony, imagery, and rhetorical questions. Now that I have my thesis statement, I'm going to go back to my introduction outline. I'm simply going to restate it there. The next thing I want to do then is dive into that first body paragraph. And I'm going to start by creating my topic sentence. Remember, a topic sentence is simply how I take the central topic I'm discussing based on that first reason, so here verbal irony, and showing you how I plan to discuss it. For example, Shakespeare employs verbal irony to establish the physical betrayal of the Dark Lady as well as his desire to feign ignorance. So here I'm telling you the reason or the topic I'm going to use to discuss my central claim, this mutual deceit that's shown through this physical betrayal of the Dark Lady, but also the speaker's desire to pretend ignorance. Then I jump to my main idea, and my main idea is going to take that topic sentence and go more in depth. Remember, the deeper I get into my body paragraph, the more specific I should get in terms of my discussion. For example, verbal irony and double meaning of the word lies shows her infidelity and his deceit in pretending not to know. So here I'm getting more specific in what do I mean by verbal irony? What instance of verbal irony do I see? And I'm picking up on that play on word in terms of lie. One is both showing the fact that she is being unfaithful to him with other men, but also that he is aware of her lies and lies in return. Then I need to look at evidence specifically from the text to show that what I'm saying is accurate. Remember, I always quote the text. I can't just ask my audience to take my word for it. Okay? And I want to draw your attention to how I quote poetry, because I told you this is going to be a little bit different. And the main thing I want you to pick up on is the fact that rather than using commas or another type of break to show that I'm going to a new line or new verse, I use this backslash here. So whenever you have a new verse that you want to quote, so for example, I want to quote verses 1 and 2 from stanza 1, I'll include that backslash here. And I also want to draw your attention to the type of evidence that I'm using. You're going to see that when I move to analysis, I take each and every piece of evidence and I use it. Okay? Never quote something you don't plan to use in your essay. Diving into analysis, the first thing I need to establish is the fact that this word lies does have that double meaning. If it doesn't, then the entirety of what I'm arguing is baseless. So I'm going to explain that it means both to tell a lie, but also to be physically intimate. Then I move even deeper to prove my point. I'm going to show that the Dark Lady is intimate with other men. and that she is deceiving Shakespeare because she swears, right, that she is made of truth, but in the very next verse, Shakespeare shows us that she, in fact, is not. But then I also need to show this mutual deception, so I can't ignore Shakespeare's fault in this either. So I turn to him and I show that he is also dishonest. For example, that third piece of evidence I use, simply I credit her false speaking tongue. So he's fully aware of the lies that she tells and the fact that she thinks him ignorant perhaps because she likes to perceive him as this young youth. And he in turn goes along with it. He plays into these lies because it flatters him. Then I'm going to repeat this same structure when I go to body paragraph number 2, only now I'm going to use my second example of a literary device, which in this case is imagery. So I start with my topic sentence. I'm going to say that Shakespeare further solidifies the base of mutual deception and their desire to remain in this relationship through using imagery. Next, I jump to that main idea and I take imagery and I move it a step further. I'm going to say that imagery is used to explain the benefit of staying in a relationship built on lies, right? Because I need to explain why on earth either of these people would continue to remain with someone who's so deceitful. I need to jump back then to the poem and grab evidence that is an example of imagery, but then also upholds the fact that both of them, again, are being deceptive, and that they're doing this out of a desire that they have to be with one another. So you'll see that the evidence that I have is going to be used then in the analysis I give to prove that point. So my first piece of analysis is this idea of the speaker as a young lover who's unaware of the possibility of deception in love, and that this perhaps maybe gives a reason why she is so open in sense of her betrayal, right? Because she thinks him ignorant. But also by extension, we see that his reasoning, right? She lies to me and she does so openly, so brazenly because she thinks me young. He then takes that to say, well, I then can see myself as this young man again. But in the very next verse, we understand that this is false, right? Jumping back to evidence number 2. Although she knows my days are past the best. So his entire reasoning that she is so open, so brazen, because she thinks him young, he discredits in the very next verse. And so I'm using imagery to show that they have established that they both deceive one another based around this point of pretending that he is some unlearned, untutored youth. And that they do so because they are both flattered, right? He for regaining his youth, and she for being able to be cunning, to deceive him, right? So I paint this image of mutual deception in that they both desire to remain with one another, at least for physical benefit. Then I jump to my last body paragraph, and note that I'm using 3 because I've identified these 3 literary devices. You're more than welcome to write an essay with 2 body paragraphs rather than 3, but in that sense you would have to cut back on one of these literary devices. So I start then with my topic sentence, and my third literary device is rhetorical questions. So my third body paragraph, that topic sentence, must mention rhetorical questions in light of the nature of their relationship. For example, Shakespeare includes rhetorical questions to highlight the reality that both he and the Dark Lady willfully deceive one another. Then I jump to my main idea, and I'm going to play on this idea of willful deceit with the use of rhetorical questions. For example, rhetorical questions are not meant to cause change in either of them, but to explain that they both benefit from this deceit. The primary example that I have are the rhetorical questions themselves. But wherefore says she not she is unjust? And wherefore say not I that I am old? And in this example in particular, because we have this new understanding of the word wherefore, my analysis needs to begin with explaining what this word meant in Shakespeare's time. Similarly to my argument with verbal irony, I had to explain what lies meant first. So here I know that wherefore simply means why. So this helps in my understanding of knowing that this is a question first and foremost, right? Because of the use of that word wherefore, but also his use of that question mark. Then I need to go to the next level of my analysis. I need to explain that not only is this a question, it's a rhetorical one, meaning he really doesn't want an answer because he already knows it. And I know that this is in fact a rhetorical question because, one, he never addresses her. So if he really wanted to know why she doesn't come out and say that she is unfaithful, he would have simply asked her himself. But she is never directly addressed in the entire poem. But then I also have evidence that this is a rhetorical question because he goes on to answer it in the verses that follow. And like rhetorical questions usually are, the answer is very obvious. He's already explained that he gives in or he turns a blind eye to this deceit because it allows him to believe that he is young again. Then I'm going to turn to the last thing in my outline, and that's my conclusion. And you'll recall that my conclusion is going to have these three main things. I'm going to restate my thesis, restate my main ideas, and then finally end with either a concluding thought or perhaps a call to action. So restating your thesis statement is really easy. Just take a look at it and try to maybe change around the sentence structure, paraphrase, use different synonyms. So the example I've come up with is this. Through the use of verbal irony, imagery, and rhetorical questions, Shakespeare clearly identifies the base of mutual deceit that forms his relationship with the Dark Lady. So I've included both my reasons in terms of those literary devices, but also the claim I'm making, so the nature of their relationship. I jump then to restating my main ideas. Note that because I had 3 body paragraphs, I now have 3 main ideas. So one, that there is this clear establishment of physical betrayal on the part of the Dark Lady. 2, that there's no desire to leave because both of them are gaining something. There's this idea of mutual fulfillment in their deceit. And then finally, that they have every reason to believe that this relationship will continue without any change, through the fact that this change is not desired by either party. Then lastly, I have my ending sentence in my conclusion, and I might end with something like this. Shakespeare's clear shift away from true love in prior sonnets to a deceitful love, and the blindness of the speaker in Sonnet 138 serves as a caution to those who refuse to examine the object of their affection. So here I'm making a point to my audience that Shakespeare was willfully blind in Sonnet 138, and we see that it causes him to be trapped in this relationship based on lies and deception and infidelity. So then we as the reader should learn from his mistakes, to not be willfully blind in who we choose to give our hearts to, but to be open and aware and very analytical in terms of not looking at problems and turning away from them, but rather looking at problems and seeking to solve them. That's going to conclude my sample outline then for the essay prompt, and I want to turn now to explaining your essay writing assignment. Okay, so please make sure you're listening very carefully. So you will have to write a 4 to 5 paragraph essay on either of the following prompts. Okay, so you have 2 prompts. The second prompt, you'll see that bullet point number 2 is the same prompt that I just outlined together with you. So if you went through this outline and you felt like you really understood this sonnet in particular, Sonnet 138, go ahead and use that prompt. For those of you who perhaps were struggling to understand this sonnet, or you simply preferred Sonnet 116 better, you can answer the following prompt, bullet point number 1. How does William Shakespeare characterize the nature of love to the fair youth in Sonnet 116? So how does Shakespeare describe what love should be to the fair youth in Sonnet 116, and what sort of literary devices does he use to do that? So these prompts are very similar. The only real differences are 1, the sonnet being used, and then 2, the claim that you're being asked to make. So in that first prompt, in bullet point number 1, you're being asked to claim what does Shakespeare view the nature of true love to be, versus our claim in this video for our second prompt was what exactly is the nature of his relationship with the Dark Lady. Your due date for that is going to be a week from tomorrow, so March 25th by 11:59 p.m. So please plan ahead. You have more than a week to write it. You can go ahead and type that, obviously, and go ahead and email that to me. Better yet, as I'm going to explain for you on Less, you can go ahead and Google link that as well. So just a brief preview for our next series. We'll be finished then with Shakespearean sonnets, and we're going to move on to continuing to analyze poetry, but doing so with new poems and new poets, and also new objective. So we're going to move into comparing poems with one another to try to identify those common themes. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to reading all of those essays next week.